Welcome to Chapter 1, Introduction, the Phenomenon of Serial Murder. So, a lot of what we claim to know about serial murder is based on misinformation. And a lot of that misinformation is a result of public pressure to know more about the subject. Now, we do know, of course, that the media work closely with law enforcement. But as social scientists, we need to objectively examine phenomena to determine their origin, nature, and impact on society. We are getting closer to understanding the dynamics of serial killing and its causation. So, what are some myths about serial murders? Um, that serial killers have a prototype, that nearly all of them are white, male, and either insane or psychopaths. That they're driven to kill due to sexual abuse, that they're highly intelligent, that they're all what we consider to be lust killers, that they kill alone and cannot stop killing. They're highly mobile, that have a desire to be caught, and they have dozens of victims all dying violent deaths. In recent years, the majority of serial killers are Black. So the most recent data on this shows them to be about 50-50. Nearly 17% are female. Things to remember are that insanity is a legal term and only 2 to 4% are legally insane. Most serial killers are not particularly intelligent, but rather of average intelligence. Some are actually motivated by material gain, and many kill due to rejection and abandonment in childhood. Most do not have dozens of victims. Most kill in a local area, and some have as many as several years between murders. About 1 in 4 have one or more partners. Some victims are poisoned, and some learn from experience and avoid detection, while others are caught and imprisoned only to be released and kill again. Now, some serial killers are true psychopaths, while others may have some psychopathic traits. Several of the high body count serial killers who have been PCOR evaluated do not qualify as psychopaths. And finally, serial killers vary in race, ethnicity, religion, nationality, age, gender, socioeconomic status, IQ, and education. Now, is serial murder a more modern phenomenon? Hagerty argues that serial killers are distinctly modern, and the larger societal context has really been ignored. He offers 6 preconditions for serial murder that are rooted in modernity. So, first of all, is the use of mass media and the rise of celebrity status. If you're a serial killer, you may appear in Time magazine, you may have movies made about you, and you may gain a following of murder groupies. The second precondition is a society populated with strangers. The third is a society void of value considerations that encourages extreme rationalization. So we live in a society where there's a lot of depersonalization. That depersonalization of others and perceiving relationships as instrumental, meaning they serve a purpose, right? We use them for some type of gain, makes killing others so much easier and pleasurable. There's a cultural framework that, through processes of denigration, positions specific groups of people. So, one thing we'll see is that there are specific groups of people that may be at higher risk to become a victim of a serial killer. And those are people that we just think of as not as important in our society. So, that could be prostitutes, the homeless, etc. We also have opportunity structures that provide serial killers more access to certain victims. So, in the last 50 years or so, our routine activities have changed. And we now have most women working outside their homes. And that society could be engineered. And some serial killers provide a service in, quote, ridding society of certain undesirable types of people. So let's start with a little review about what constitutes murder. Murder is an illegal taking of another life, right? Homicide is the killing of one human being by another, but not all homicides are criminal. Murder is criminal homicide, and it has to do with intent. It's determined by provocation, cooling off periods, and what a reasonable person would be expected to do under the circumstances that led to the killing. Now, murder has several degrees. First degree murder also often includes felony murder, and these are the murders that are being committed by serial killers. It's a felony murder is a murder that's committed in the course of committing another felony. So you're robbing a bank and you kill somebody. First degree murder could involve poisoning, lying in wait, torture, use of explosives, right? But first degree murder is premeditated with malice aforethought. So what have the murder and non-negligent manslaughter rates look like? If you notice here, you can see these rates for for 2010 to 2019. 2019 is the latest data that we have. And you can see that it's fairly steady, right? So it goes from 4.78 murders per 100,000 people to 4.7 to 4.74. And most recently, we're at 5.0. Now, capital cases are those types of murders that are eligible for the death penalty, right? So that's why they're called a capital murder. They're eligible for capital punishment. These are generally considered the most serious types of murders. Although for those of you that have taken the course on the death penalty, you know that a lot of murders that are concerning, certainly, but are not the worst of the worst, are often eligible for the death penalty as well. Right, but these are premeditated murders, willful, intentional killing of another person. Now, as I mentioned before, homicide is the killing of one person by another, okay? And it can be justifiable. So this is usually like self-defense, police in the line of duty, and soldiers at war. Now, we talked about murder, and manslaughter is a lesser degree of murder. And manslaughter can be voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary manslaughter is the killing of another person in the heat of passion, in the commission of another felony, or in self-defense. Involuntary manslaughter is sometimes referred to as negligent homicide. So this is while someone was committing a non-felony offense. Maybe you're driving recklessly, and so you're being negligent, and someone dies as a result of that. Now, there are specific types of homicides. Neonaticide is the killing of a newborn baby under 24 hours old. Infanticide is a baby that's less than a year old. Siblicide is killing of your sibling. Fratricide is the killing of one's brother or sister, usually in the military, like friendly fire. Prolicide is the killing of your own children. Parricide is the killing of a parent, and genocide is the extermination of a specific racial, ethnic, religious, or national group of people. Now, most of these are not going to apply to serial killers. So what is a serial murder? So the FBI updated their definition in 2008. The most common definition used is the unlawful killing of 3 or more victims by the same offenders in separate events with a cooling off period in between. Now, the FBI has started labeling incidents in which there are at least 2 murders as a serial killing. The reason for this is because if someone has killed 2 people with a cooling off period in between, they're probably likely to kill a third. And so the idea is to start being able to investigate that as a serial murder sooner rather than later. Now, chapter 1 also talks a lot about mass murder, which is not the topic of our course. But mass murderers are the killing of 4 or more people in one incident. Mass murderers are usually apprehended at the site, commit suicide at the site, or killed by the police. And sometimes they surrender afterwards. How we react to mass murder is often very media intense. It's focused and it's for a short period of time. Serial murder may extend over several years. Serial killers also make efforts to elude detection. And so they could continue to kill for weeks, months, or years before being stopped. So as I mentioned, a mass murderer kills groups of people usually within a few minutes or hours, whereas a serial killer is killing over a longer period of time. We don't really see the use of the term spree murder anymore, but a spree murder is kind of like in between a mass murder and a serial murder. That's not really used because it doesn't really provide much investigative help. But a spree murder is usually like no cooling off period. So as of 2008, experts have agreed that the concept of spree murder will be eliminated and that they would be included with serial killers. So several different people have tried to put together typologies of serial murder. So a typology is if I were to put together a typology, it would have like several different types of serial killers in it. Okay. Each individual type within the typology is one type. Okay. So Will classified 10 different types or of murderers in general. These aren't serial killers based on a range of biosocial psychological categories. So depressive, psychotic, those that have an organic brain disorder, those that are psychopaths, passive aggressive, alcoholic, hysterical, ones where a juvenile is the killer, etc. Lee did so according to motive, profit, passion, hatred, power or domination, revenge, opportunism, fear, contract killing, desperation, compassion, and ritual killers. Now, Guttmacher in 1973 described the sadist serial killer. And they often establish a pattern and have a victim type, and they derive sexual gratification from killing. This is what we think of these lust murderers when we think about serial killers, but they're just one type of serial killer. In 1976, Lund did some research and found very little evidence of mental illness among serial killers. And Danto says many serial killers may be described as obsessive compulsive because they normally kill according to a particular style and pattern. So researchers then create profiles of the quote unquote typical serial killer based on data on offenders and victims. And the most stereotypical serial killer that we hear about has a sexual element. This is the serial killer that gets a lot of public attention, causes a lot of harm. They're usually cases involving abduction, rape, torture, strangulation. Now, Holmes has put together a typology of serial murderers as well. The first is the visionary. This is someone who kills in response to the commands of voices or visions emanating from forces of good or evil. And these folks are often suffering from psychosis. Mission-oriented serial killers believe it's their mission to rid society of certain groups of people. That could be a racial or ethnic group. It could be children. It could be prostitutes. Hedonistic serial killers or thrill seekers, and this is the group where lust murderers belong. There's often a sexual element, and there's often post-mortem mutilation. And finally, power control-oriented serial killers are focused on the ability to control and exert power over a helpless victim. Now, when the FBI first began their research on serial killings, they talked about organized versus disorganized killers, and they were kind of set up as a dichotomy, but it really runs more along a continuum. So this organized disorganized dichotomy is a stepping stone then to more advanced profiling techniques. So organized killers tend to be intelligent and socially competent. They plan their murders, target strangers, and demand that their victims be submissive. Whereas disorganized killers are of average intelligence, socially immature. They may know their victims. They inflict sudden violence on them, and their killings may be spontaneous. Now, when we think about serial killers, we often think about the lust killer. And a lust murderer is generally highly intelligent, has high birth order status. So that's like firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, fourthborn, etc. Tends to have a masculine image, be charismatic, socially and sexually capable, occupationally mobile, may live with a partner, may be geographically mobile, probably experienced harsh discipline, is able to control their emotions during the crime, has a high interest in how the media responds to the crime, and is often a model inmate once incarcerated. Now, an organized lust killer has some fairly predictable behavior after the crime. They might return to the crime scene, feel the need to volunteer information. They may enjoy being friendly with the police or trying to get involved. They do expect to be interrogated. They might move the body to a new location, and they may also expose the body to draw attention to the crime. Now, a disorganized offender tends to have below average intelligence, low birth order status, socially immature, they don't really date, they may be a high school dropout, their father is often under or unemployed, they may live alone, have secret hiding places, be nocturnal, live or work near the crime scene, engage in unskilled labor, have significant behavioral changes, not a lot of interest in media attention, limited alcohol consumption, and a lot of anxiety during the commission of the crime. Now, a disorganized offender also has fairly predictable behavior. They too may return to the crime scene. They might attend the funeral of the victim. They might keep a diary, have a lot of changing employment. They may become religious, have changes in their personality, and they might submit personal ads in newspapers regarding their victims. Now, Hickey is the author of our textbook, and he proposes 3 categories of offenders. And he does this based on location. So traveling serial killers who cover many thousands of miles each year, murdering victims in several states as they go. Local serial killers who never leave the state in which they start killing. And serial killers who are place specific. They don't leave their homes or places of employment. Their victims already reside in the same physical structure or are lured each time to the same location. Now, Hickey's writing this book, but it's really based upon his research. And he looks at serial murders between the year 1800 and 2014. Now, he went about identifying cases through as many avenues as possible. So this included interviews, newspapers, journals, bibliographies, biographies, computer searches of social science abstracts. So that's like going into our empirical databases, and the data set from the first edition of this book. So when he first wrote this book, he's looking at data from 1800 to 2000. Now, when he does this, he gathers all this information, and then he looks at things like the time frame, the geographic location, number of victims, victim-offender relationship, age and gender of particular victims, and the degree of victim facilitation. Now, this data set represents more than 100 female offenders and nearly 600 male offenders in the US, and over 540 cases. These cases are responsible for between 3,700 and 5,850 homicides. Now, the reason we have such a range here is that sometimes serial killers are suspected of killing more people, and we can't necessarily confirm all their victims. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to throughout this chapter, okay, throughout this book, is that Hickey often puts data out there and says, oh, from 1800 to 2000, here's what that data looked like, okay? And then from 2004 to 2014, here's this other data. This is not a methodologically sound or proper comparison, okay? And so let's talk about our first extra credit. If you've had me before, you know that sometimes I offer extra credit. You get 1 point on your next exam, but you have to email me the answer by Sunday, by Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. You need to have the answer, and then you need to have a link to a credible source. So that's not Wikipedia, right? In this case, you're not going to necessarily have a source. So what I want you to do is explain to me why you think this is not methodologically sound.